Hello and welcome to a new video here on my channel. Today I'm presenting to you my part 2 of the story MHA and the Mystery of Quirks. I hope you really like it, and if you like it, leave a like and comment down below. And then let's start with the right with the story and don't beat around the bush anymore. Let's start with the story. Let's go.
Luna, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost, Michael said, but the shocked expression on her face wouldn't fade. What the hell? How can this be? If that were the case, we'd be distantly related. It's not impossible that the old witch had children once, but that would mean her descendants spread further. Is that possible? Yes, it is, but then why am I meeting someone who actually descends from her? Luna whispered in alarm, leaning against the wall. As if that weren't bad enough, it also meant others with similar powers might still be walking the world. It implied that the world was far more complex than she had ever imagined. The question arose, why was it so? Why do I get the impression that this shouldn't have happened? Why do I feel this world is different than it should be? I've only known this world, and I've lived in it for just a few years. Wait, how old am I? Why didn't I notice before? I don't even know my own age. Luna thought, realizing just how strange her life truly was. Her memories of time with her mother were blurred, filled with pain and other negative emotions. But the question remained, why was Lady Shigaraki a woman? It should have been otherwise. As Luna pondered this, a searing pain shot through her skull, as if someone were driving a nail into her head. Arg, what the hell? This shouldn't be happening, Luna muttered, clutching her head. Are you okay? What's happening to you? Michael asked. Nothing, but it's my turn now. My quirk lets me analyze and manipulate others' quirks. I can create, grant, destroy, or enhance superpowers. And I believe you, or one of your ancestors, descends from my mother. I know how that sounds, and I ask you to hear me out. It seems absurd, and you probably won't believe me at first, but your ability is far too similar to the one I know from my mother for it to be a coincidence. I told you my power lets me examine other people's quirks. I can do it on you to confirm my suspicion. There are no side effects, as far as I know, and I've done it many times. So trust me, I don't want to harm you, but if I'm right and someone finds out, we'll both be in deep shit, because the Egyptian pro-heroes are on high alert after defeating my mother, and others might try to exploit the power vacuum. It's hard to explain, and I'd rather examine your quirk before risking more. But I'm pretty sure we're related, in an indirect way. Luna said nervously. What do you mean by analyzing my quirk, and how will it work? Michael asked. Simple. I'll just apply my quirk to you, and as long as you don't run around wildly, it'll finish quickly. You won't even notice what I'm doing. No one has ever detected when I've examined their quirk. I just need to look at them. Luna said, eyes darting anxiously around the room. When she looked at Michael, her eyes sparkled in every color of the rainbow. It was a breathtaking spectacle to see her turquoise eyes shift into all the hues of the rainbow, like mother of pearl or the light patterns dancing on a pool's bottom when waves ripple the surface. Beautiful and impressive, yet in her case rendered in rainbow colors instead of ordinary light. Okay, this will be harder to understand and probably hard to explain. But your quirk isn't what you think. It doesn't copy powers and block the original holder, which I understand you assume. Your ability does something entirely different, something more radical. It's essentially a low-budget version of my mother's power. I wouldn't call it what hers is called, but rather many for one, because you're a simpler variant of her. So, to put it bluntly, your quirk steals superpowers temporarily, and if you had someone's consent, you could steal them permanently. You have a limited capacity of powers you can steal, but when you steal them temporarily, they can remain with you for up to 2 days before returning. Luna said, and silence fell in the room. The weight of Luna's revelation hung over them like a heavy cloud, pressing down. Luna wondered how he would react, whether he'd dismiss her as a liar or exaggerator, or take her seriously. Okay, so you're saying the stories of All for One, the greatest of all villains, are true. So my suspicions were right, but the odds of you meeting me and having such a power are near zero. It's astronomically unlikely, There can't be that many descendants of All for One, Michael said. Okay, that was unexpected. I thought you'd react differently. Besides, the gender is backwards. The greatest of villains, the king of quirks, or the merchant of quirks, as you might call him, was my mother, as I told you. I really don't know how everyone assumed she was a dude. She doesn't have a thing down there, Luna said. But she realized the conversation wasn't going the way she'd imagined. It turned out positive, as he was more open than she'd expected. Luna also learned things she hadn't known. He, too, had assumed his power was merely a weak copying ability. But there was no need to test that. I've done genealogical research to learn about my family and the origin of quirks, but I didn't get far. I knew about the villain AFO and that my family once worked for him many years ago. But little beyond that. That was after years of research. Then I had the problem that my quirk was recorded as a weak copying quirk. If it were something stronger, I'd regret having it examined. Anyway, that led to my power being feared when I first used it, because I also blocked someone else's quirk, and then the power I'd copied or, as you say, stolen, reverted. After that, I never really used my ability, and people kept embellishing stories about me, treating me like a villain. Then came the scene where I wanted to discover my quirk's true origin and began genealogy research, only to uncover the truth I already told you, about All for One and all that. Michael said. As they continued talking, Luna realized his conviction was genuine, not just an act but a firm, real belief that in a world saturated with propaganda telling children that being a hero is the best choice, even if it means dying, he fully agreed with her that it was not a healthy society. They both saw that heroes could achieve far more if they thought logically and analytically, recruiting people whose abilities weren't flashy or dramatic. The best example Luna could give was the most obvious. All Might, the world's strongest hero, absurd in her eyes, since Stained Stripes, the superheroine with the quirk New Order, was far more powerful than All Might. All Might could never defeat Stained Stripes. She would only need to utter a new rule. Say, anyone who moves is instantly killed, to end him. But it's precisely that stupidity that made me wait so many years for the heroes to find my mother's trail. It took ages for those idiots, the pro-heroes, to discover where she was hiding. But no, they had to send that big muscle guy to fight. If they'd pulled together the few pro-heroes with strength from around the world, they would have won. New Order, probability manipulation, and other powers are broken as hell and could have surely defeated her. But they had to focus on one blonde, blue-eyed idiot whose best problem-solving method is just punching things, Luna said irritably. That sounds like you really despise All Might. Yet from everything I've heard, you're grateful to him for defeating your mother. And if I may say so, I understand you well, but it feels unsettling that you're so happy she was killed, or that you helped in any way, Michael said. I'm not angry at All Might specifically. I'm angry that his ego is as big as this goddamn planet and that no one thinks of how to actually kill him. No one considers attaching a tracker to him, discovering his secret identity, and shooting him in his sleep. No one thinks of taking his loved ones hostage, or quietly tailing him. You could poison him, suffocate him, or leave him in zero gravity, because raw strength does nothing if you can't push off anything. If I put him in a vacuum, he'd die no matter how strong he is. He'd have nothing to push against. I simply don't understand how people in this world are so ignorant. I feel quirks have robbed people of logical, analytical thinking. It infuriates me to see people die or get hurt in villain attacks while everyone thinks it's a good idea to wait for the right hero instead of shooting the villain between the eyes. Well, not every villain can be killed that way, but most can. I mean, I've seen more than 10 robberies in Alexandria in a single week that could have been ended by one well-placed shot, but no one seems to think of it because everyone assumes villains are bulletproof for some reason. I don't get it. I once took out 3 of them with a fucking rock throw. That was just a good aim. Luna said. Time passed from morning to noon, hours of conversation went by, and Luna's head began to throb. She decided to make her final, and most helpful, offer. She'd modify Michael's quirk many for one. He pondered for a few minutes, and after more discussion, they agreed on the modifications, an offer even Michael couldn't refuse. It might also have been his curiosity to see if it was really possible to modify another person's quirk. Done, Luna said proudly. I've added the function so that instead of only stealing, you can now create permanent copies of the quirks you want. To do that, you need either extended skin contact, several minutes, or, with someone's consent, only a brief touch to immediately generate a copy. I've also unlocked an existing function of your quirk. You can pass on powers to others with their consent. Unfortunately, I couldn't improve your quirk limit. It probably would have killed me if I'd used too much energy. Your limit remains 10 quirks, but otherwise you're a better version of my mother now. You can copy, pass on, and steal quirks at will. Luna puffed out her chest in triumph. Goddamn, I can feel the change in me. You weren't lying. How overpowered is your quirk? You can create, manipulate, modify and grant abilities. Your quirk really is the absolute inverse of all for one. You're a game changer for this world. You could turn the balance of power on its head. If we play this smart, we could actually correct a lot of injustice. Michael said, a scientist, writer and artist, full of excitement and conviction. While this was happening and the beginnings of something much larger were taking root with Luna and Michael, who would soon become the right hand of her growing underground organization, something entirely different occurred far away in Japan, in a hospital. It may seem odd that the world's strongest hero would wake up in a hospital in Japan after his fight with Lady Shigaraki, especially since most of her underground labs were in Egypt. But their battle did not take place in Egypt, it took place in Japan, and the destruction was catastrophic. An entire city was pulverized in their titanic clash. The quake registered as a magnitude 5 event in the surrounding area. Fortunately, there were no other major settlements close by, so although avalanches and wreckage followed, the damage was confined to that single city. All Might lay awake for several minutes, unable to bring himself to stand. His whole body felt bandaged and as if it had been plunged into flame, not the tolerable fire of his powered form, but real fire that would burn him in his weakened, true form. When Tashinori Yagi's sunken eyes scanned the room, he saw nothing but sterile white walls and smelled the sharp antiseptic scent common to hospitals. What in the world happened, he thought. Why was she so much stronger than anything I've faced before? What made her ramp up so fast? She nearly killed me in an instant. She had more powers than I've ever seen. So why did many of those abilities suddenly weaken or malfunction at the exact moment our fight began? It really looked like something inside her was fighting against her own powers. I know that shouldn't be possible, but it played out like her quirks turned on her. Could quirks really rebel against their user, or spontaneously fail like that? No, that can't be a normal cause. Tashinori Yagi wondered. As he continued to puzzle over what had gone wrong in the battle, he couldn't make sense of it. Powers disappearing at random, some simply ceasing to exist, some acting as if they'd rebelled. It was deeply strange. Footsteps snapped him out of his thoughts as the sliding door painted a bright yellow opened. Night Eye, his sidekick, hurried into the room, looking unsteady on his feet. Dark circles beneath his eyes showed how little sleep he'd had. He was pale and restless. Behind him came Nezu, the principal of UA Academy. Good to see you back, All Might, but you need to rest and not overexert yourself, Nezu said, waving the nurse away. It didn't take much persuasion from the small, influential creature, part mouse, part something else. Nezu's little white ears and black eyes twinkled with intelligence and a different kind of urgency. Tashinori didn't even remember when he'd gotten so good at reading the expressions of the mouse-like principal. What's wrong, Nezu? You look like you've got bad news. Did I fail to beat her? All Might asked, uncertain. We're not 100% sure yet, Nezu replied. We haven't found Lady Shigaraki's body. We haven't finished searching, not everything's been checked. Her body could still be found. What we can say is she's severely weakened. Even if she survived, she's taken worse damage than you, so that's a plus for our side. Not that I like seeing you hurt, old friend, but I'm here about something else, something potentially more problematic. Nezu said plainly, without beating around the bush. What could be worse than Lady Shigaraki? All Might asked, confused and alarmed. You know her quirk is called All for One. The problem, and what may be far more dangerous, is all for all. To explain that, you first have to understand how Night Eye's quirk has changed. Night Eye, who clearly had been living on coffee and adrenaline, spoke next. How has his quirk changed? Tashinori asked. A hush fell over the room so deep All Might thought he could hear a pin drop. His blood pounded as he tried to process the new information. All for all sounded like a quirk more dangerous than All for One. The fact that Nezu and Night Eye both knew of it, and that it had something to do with Night Eye's future sight, made All Might suspect it had to do with time, and that could not be good. Night Eye explained as he leaned forward. My quirk, the ability to see the future, has changed. I can't say when or why I didn't notice sooner, but now I can see more than the future. I can see the past, too, not in a controlled way, but it's there. The problem is I've seen a series of events that shouldn't have happened. One thing I saw was a project called Apophis, named after the Egyptian god who swallows the sun. It appears Lady Shigaraki was working on Apophis in some of her underground labs in Egypt. The project was apparently designed to turn her into a god, a weapon that would let her kill any hero or villain with ease. It was her top priority. The worst part is that Apophis should not exist. I never saw it in any of my previous visions. Whenever I used my quirk before, this project never appeared. I can't explain it except to say it should not have existed in the timeline. Night Eye said in a weary voice, the tone of a friend used to hard truths. Standing by the window with light on his face, All Might tried to make sense of it. A project intended to make Lady Shigaraki divine and able to kill him easily had been discovered, even though it should not have existed at all. The news was surreal. All Might felt his legs go weak and sank back onto the hospital bed. What do you mean by Project Apophis? He asked, uncertain. We don't know much, Nezu admitted. Lady Shigaraki was meticulous about covering Apophis's tracks. I think only she truly knew all the details. It definitely relates to the past, the origin of quirks and X-energy, which underpins all paranormal phenomena here. From what we have, Apophis created one or more individuals, and voice recordings suggest the plan, or one phase of it, was to copy the all-for-one quirk and give it to multiple clones or something similar. But something unforeseen happened, and from that point all our attempts to gather more data on Apophis failed. No further digital records remain in the underground lab systems, and physical documents were destroyed before our teams reached them. Nezu said, studying All Might with his dark eyes. The conversation continued, and All Might learned of more than a single temporal anomaly, an event that simply should never have existed. Why Night Eye's quirk began to evolve was unclear. Nezu's leading theory, the anomaly caused timeline branches to split, parallel possibilities, alternate worlds, different outcomes, much like a series of event scenarios. For every choice, a different possible future branches off. The confusing part, for All Might to comprehend, is that some of those branches don't disappear when decisions aren't taken. Night Eye described the past like a path with uneven offshoots and the future as a web of infinite possible paths that quickly becomes a fog, blocking clear sight. In simple terms, it has become impossible to reliably see more than 2 days ahead. Everything beyond that grows blurry and distorted. The previous limit, that Night Eye could use his quirk only once per day, has somehow been removed. He can now use it repeatedly. But that freedom is of limited use when countless variables and branching possibilities make the future incoherent. So whatever happened makes it as if our universe once followed a fixed script, past and future carved in stone, and now something altered that script. Am I understanding that correctly? All Might asked, clutching his head as a severe headache built. Yes, that's right, Night Eye replied. The world we lived in had a past and future set like carved stone. Whatever event occurred changed that irrevocably. It seems tied to Project Apophis and began a few months earlier. My personal theory is that the moment Lady Shigaraki conceived Apophis, that change initiated. I can't prove it, only hypothesize. Okay, what does this mean? What is Project Apophis? What are we supposed to do? If our world has been changed, what does that even imply? All Might asked. That's the million-dollar question, Nezu replied. We have no real idea what Project Apophis is, nor how it ties into the other visions. Hearing there might be more information, more glimpses of the future, since visions always seem tied to what's to come, sent a chill down All Might's spine. He remembered that thought again. It was almost unimaginable that a quirk could be more powerful than All for One. A power that lets its wielder steal and redistribute quirks. All for All sounded, by its name alone, like something beyond both One for All and All for One. Thinking about it made his head throb. Whether that was from his injuries or the weight of the news, he couldn't tell. The whole thing was simply overwhelming. He didn't have to ask for more. Nezu continued to explain Night Eye's visions and the threat of All for All. Night Eye, exhausted from days of little sleep, leaned against the wall, briefly closed his eyes, and let Nezu fill in the details. The visions Night Eye received of the future, before his quirk changed, showed a recurring, similar outcome across many possible timelines, Nezu said. We must treat this cautiously. Likelihood isn't destiny. What we're calling All for All, its exact conditions of existence and origin are unclear. What we do know is that two quirks, in some way, can coalesce into one, producing All for All, the most powerful quirk in our recorded history. Possessing it does not instantly make someone a god. Mastery is not automatic. From what we suspect, All for All can manipulate, create, steal, copy, and pass on abilities, practically anything you can imagine to do with quirks. That's the terrifying part. We're not even sure what it can't do. The visions were blurred, but even if All for All comes into being, which is not guaranteed, the bearer would have to be extremely careful. Night Eye's visions suggested that multiple individuals could potentially gain the quirk, but All for All behaves like a singularity. There can be only one such quirk at a time, almost like a natural constant localized in one place. It's reminiscent, in how it behaves, of quantum mechanics. That's essentially all the concrete information we have. Nezu sounded mildly frustrated at the lack of data on such a potentially world-shattering power. Even as Nezu thought through the implications, he understood absolute power didn't have to mean immediate catastrophe, though some information had been withheld so as not to terrify All Might. Still, one thing was clear: in every possible future where All for All appeared, the world was upended. Whether for better or worse, this quirk's presence was consistently tied to fundamental change. Nezu considered that perhaps there was something like fate at work. In almost every one of the countless possible futures where this ability existed, the world was transformed, almost as if the essence of the quirk carried the imperative to remake the world. It felt akin to X energy itself, the force of pure change, something he and other scientists still could not fully understand. That mystery delighted Nezu. Nothing pleased him more than an unsolved puzzle. Nezu lingered a moment by All Might's bedside, trading a few careful words about recovery and contingency plans, then offered the old hero a small, formal bow. Rest, he said simply, voice precise as ever. All Might managed a weary smile and a grateful nod, and Nezu turned to go. He left the room with the same quiet assurance he carried everywhere, sleeves neatly arranged, mind already running through a dozen new hypotheses. In the corridor he almost bumped into Razorhead, who stood there as if he'd been waiting for company. The hero raised a single eyebrow and asked, in a tone that was more amused than accusatory, "Nezu, what brings you here?" Nezu inclined his head. "I came to check on All Might," he answered, clipped and matter of fact. Razorhead shrugged, easy and untroubled. "Same for me, I came by to see Humals." There was a casualness to him, the kind that belied years of facing danger. He meant no offense, only to mark the coincidence. They exchanged a few more polite words, the corridor filling for a moment with the ordinary choreography of heroes doing their duty, and then time moved on as it always does. Far away, the Hero Association in Egypt pressed on with its search, tracing the last known movements of Lady Shigaraki, digging into the ruins of the underground labs, and piecing together the web of projects buried beneath layers of secrecy. What the investigators found made it clear that Apophis was not the only clandestine program. Alongside the whispers of God-making and timeline-strange anomalies, there lay records, fragmentary, scorched, redacted, pointing to a second initiative the underground scientists had called Chimera. Chimera had been simpler in concept than Apophis and therefore, mercifully for the investigators, somewhat more tractable. Its aim was blunt and mechanical: combine quirks, force them into new configurations, amplify them, weld them together until something new emerged. The team uncovered evidence that Chimera produced multiple specimens. Whether those specimens were clones engineered from scratch or people whose personalities had been overridden by the process remained unclear. The papers and tapes left too many questions and too few certainties. What was unmistakable was the product. Chimeras were grotesque in variety and often in form. Some chimeras were explicitly animal hybrids, creatures where the instincts of different species had been grafted together and spiked with quirks, resulting in odd, half-understood behaviors. Other specimens were human aggregations, one body bearing several fused quirks, or two genetic templates merged into a single, hollowed mind. In certain cases, a chimera looked outwardly like a single person with strangely layered abilities. In others, the result was monstrous or absurd, a patchwork of traits that made no natural sense. They were not uniformly vicious, most moved with a blunt simplicity, thinking little, feeling little, acting on compressed needs and directives rather than malice. They were, above all, profoundly unnatural, products of engineering rather than evolution, and therefore objects of both scientific horror and desperate curiosity. The Hero Association cataloged each recovered example with clinical care, noting functions and failure modes, trying to map how quirks reacted when forced into unnatural marriages. Chimera, while not as world-bending as Apophis, offered an unsettling glimpse at what happens when quirks are treated as components instead of lives. The results could be powerful, useful, dangerous, and grotesquely wrong all at once. Time continued to move, patient and indifferent. The teams in Egypt cataloged what they could and took what they found into custody. 12 distinct chimera specimens in total were recovered, each carefully documented and transported to secure containment sites dotted across the country. Of those 12, roughly 5 proved coherent enough to communicate with the investigators, brief, blunt conversations that revealed little but confirmed that these beings were not simple monsters. Where communication failed, the chimeras were handled like dangerous animals, contained, monitored, and kept alive in austere facilities rather than treated as people with lives. They had no proper place to live. They were preserved, studied, and, when possible, given the barest attempts at care. Investigators noted, with quiet unease, that the laboratory infrastructure suggested far more than a dozen experiments had ever been attempted. Rows of breeding tubes, empty incubation chambers, and destroyed records implied a scale beyond the haul they'd managed to seize. It was likely, the reports said without melodrama, that many more chimera had been produced, some destroyed in the chaos, some missing, some perhaps still hidden where the labs had once hummed. Then something stranger happened. Over weeks that blurred into months, the number of people suddenly manifesting quirks rose, a small swelling at first, then a tide. Those who had been quirkless for generations began to report new powers. The common thread among the first to speak up was eerie and simple: a letter. The few who were willing to tell their stories, astonishing, given the stigma, said they had found a plain envelope in their mailbox with a single question inside: did you want a quirk? That was all. No signatures. No trace of a sender. No further instructions. No explanation. The Hero Association in Egypt mobilized quickly, interrogated recipients, scoured postal records, and checked CCTV feeds, but the origins of the letters remained stubbornly blank. A handful of witnesses, 2 or 3 at first, described a fleeting memory of someone offering the quirk in person, a youthful figure roughly 1.70 to 1.80 meters tall, neither clearly male nor female in the hazy recollection. The descriptions petered out, details failed to hold. Investigators suspected a quirk that erased or blurred memories of the encounter, because witnesses could not retain faces or voice patterns for long. Naturally, whispers named Lady Shigaraki. The Hero Association considered the possibility immediately: who else had the motive, the means, or the mythic reach? But the hypothesis did not sit comfortably. Lady Shigaraki, by every available account, was no young courier handing out power like candy. she was not someone who would disperse new quirks without taking others in return. Moreover, these emergent quirks were not simply transfers drawn from the existing population, they appeared to be new phenomena, spontaneously arising rather than relocated. That pattern simply did not fit with Lady Shigaraki's known methods. The question remained unanswered. Seasons turned, summer into winter and winter into spring, summers and winters cycled again. Year 1 became year 2, and the strange phenomena did not abate. If the clash with Lady Shigaraki marked time 0, then year by year the world around that point thinned and shifted. No trace of Lady Shigaraki was found in the underworld archives, no clear remnants of her network could be followed to a hiding place. It was as if she had vanished after the battle, gone, dead, or concealed beyond the reach of any search. Still, the quirk events kept happening, edging outward like ripples from a dropped stone. What began as isolated anomalies slowly multiplied and spread beyond Egypt's borders. 5 years after the battle, 5 years in which summer yielded to winter and spring returned, then summer again, the mystery remained unresolved. Lady Shigaraki had not returned to the world stage, and the new quirks that had appeared out of nowhere had become a new and growing fact of life. And so it happens that 5 years after the fight between All Might and All for One, a notable member of a notable family finally awakens from a coma. Inko Midoriya is no ordinary woman, she is one of the top attorneys in the United States. After taking a case that required her to travel back to Japan, the clash of those two titans erupted and left her gravely injured. At least, that is the official story. Hisashi Midoriya does not fully believe it. Even as he waits, year after year, for the call that will tell him how his wife is doing, he cannot shake a sinking feeling that has taken root in his bones. It feels as if something more lies behind the surface, more than a tragic coincidence that she happened to be near the battlefield when the two titans fought. The odds are simply too low, since almost all of her previous cases took place in America. What in the world actually happened to my wife? Why do I get the sense that no one wants to tell me what's wrong with her? Something is definitely off. I mean, the only assignment she had, the only job she took in Japan, ended with her in a coma. That isn't normal. There has to be something behind it, but what could it be? Hisashi asked himself, his gaze sweeping across the great living room and the well-tended gardens beyond the windows, kept immaculate by a gardener. The house, more a villa than a home, is another reminder of how fortune had come to them with little intention. Neither Hisashi nor Inko had sought such wealth, it had simply happened. The notion that she had twice hit the jackpot in the lottery still struck him as absurd, but the records said it was true. The scent of lavender and vanilla mixed with imported teas filled the room, the perfume of the wealthy, something only the privileged could afford, yet it did nothing to fill the emptiness in his chest. As Hisashi let his thoughts drift to pass the minutes until the call, his mind returned to a scene from years ago, when he, his daughter Izuka, and a quirk doctor had sat together. Each word the doctor had spoken replayed now in Hisashi's head. It's a blessing that Izuka doesn't technically have no quirk and isn't bullied for that, but her quirk is useless, because it apparently needs an external trigger to do anything. That trigger is apparently very rare, the bald doctor had said. He looked at me as if he knew more but wouldn't say. Hisashi thought, remembering how the doctor implied there was more he wasn't telling. Of course Izuka technically had a quirk, but its usefulness was effectively nil, practically zero, because no one had been able to identify the trigger that would activate it. It wasn't even a quirk with destructive power, whatever it did was narrow and had no obvious effect on the physical world, at least according to the doctor. This strangeness extended beyond Izuka. Both his daughter's quirk and his wife's quirk were listed in official documents in ways that did not quite match what they should be, something Hisashi knew better than anyone, having spent the most time with them. What struck him most forcibly was that the official record listed Izuka's quirk as a weak telekinesis. Genetically, that made sense. Hisashi himself possessed telekinesis, but he knew in his bones that his daughter's power was something else entirely, linked somehow to the mystery surrounding his wife. Then the long-awaited ring came. It cut through Hisashi's thoughts like a hot knife through butter, slicing the tension for a fraction of a second, long enough for his breath to catch, but the fear rebuilt itself just as quickly as he remembered how things could still be worse for Inko. Hisashi Midoriya, who do I have the honor of speaking to? Hisashi asked as he answered the phone, steadying himself so his hand wouldn't tremble. It's a pleasure to speak with you again, Mr. Midoriya. Your wife, Inko Midoriya, has improved significantly, but first, may I ask, is your young lady awake at the moment? Said a polished, soft voice that sounded smoky and silky at once. Why does that matter? What is really wrong with my wife? I've had this nagging feeling that someone's not telling me everything. Hisashi replied, anxious and strained. Words spilled out of him like a waterfall. He felt as if he could not control his emotions or his mouth, as if his tongue were directly tied to his gut, and when he grew uncertain he began to ramble, speaking so fast that it was hard to follow. It's nothing extraordinary, so you needn't worry. I simply didn't want to frighten the young lady with the state her husband is in. I think it's best you steady yourself. Your wife, Inko, has awakened. She wants to see you. The voice said. It was surely not an image he wanted to take lightly. Even being cautious, Hisashi felt in his bones the compulsion to be careful. He would rather not wake his daughter to visit his wife, because that would force him to explain why he'd kept Inko's coma secret and to confess he had lied, an unpalatable prospect. All right, I want to see my wife. My daughter is asleep in her room. Please open a portal for me, Hisashi said, overcome by the urgent need to see Inko again regardless of how badly hurt she might be. No sooner had he spoken than the air in front of him shimmered and a misty portal coalesced. It was a dark violet and within its depths two glowing yellow eyes blinked. Follow me now, Hisashi, the lady, Inko is waiting for you, the nebulous voice said. Seeing the familiar cloud and its glowing eyes, Hisashi felt for a fleeting moment like he was reuniting with an old friend he had not seen in a long time. But there were more pressing matters than memories. He stepped through. A sharp smell of gasoline, oil, and machinery hit him immediately, mixed with the ozone tang that accompanies high-energy conduits, the cold scent that always reminded him of storms and danger. The feeling was strange, but he pressed on. The chamber beyond the mist looked futuristic, threaded with black cables and machinery. A man, somewhat shorter than Hisashi, undeniably average in height, stood in the gloom, barely lit by rows of violet tubes and glass cylinders lining one side of the room.
And that's it for today. I hope you really liked it. If you liked it, leave a like and comment down below. And I hope we see us in the next part again. This was part 2, I think, of the story MHA and the Mystery of Quirks. And on the left side of the screen you can now see the newest video I uploaded. On the right side of the screen the playlist of this story, if I managed to create one. Or I was lazy, I don't really know. Goodbye and see you next time. Take care and goodbye.